Yeah, Gary Stevenson, shout out to Gary, wherever you are. If you are watching this in some way, my name's Jake. Pleased to meet you. I would like to debate you anywhere, anytime around the subject of Bitcoin. And if you would engage with me, we can talk around a question I want to ask you, which is, what is money? It's a very simple question that has lots of answers. And in my mind, I didn't start asking it seriously until 5 years ago. And as a result of doing it, it's made my life infinitely better. And that's largely because it's helped me to see Bitcoin for what it is. And Bitcoin is just money. But money is not something that is that easy to understand. And we've never been taught anything about, what money actually is. This is really about something I like to talk about, is information asymmetry. Where can you figure out that you know something that other people don't, and you can take advantage from that? And what's fascinating here is Gary will be a little older than me. I think I saw him on a podcast. He was 38. So I'm 36 now. So we're roughly the same age. He has worked in the belly of the fiat beast, right? Inside Citibank, one of America's largest banks, if not the largest, and trading interest rates. It's a wild story of what that world is like. And yeah, anyway, he's very, very dismissive of Bitcoin. He's recently been on a podcast, a trading podcast. It's like the Trades of Wisdom or something. And again, I haven't fully finished the episode, but he's very, 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 very clear in his opinion on Bitcoin. And he makes statements like Bitcoin's going to zero. And it's interesting because, is it? Like, what is the probability of that? And why would someone think that? And so just for me to talk through some things from my perspective about whether or not that is or isn't true, could it be the case that Bitcoin goes to zero? Well, yes. Could it be the case that I get hit by a bus tomorrow? Yes. Could it be the case that an asteroid hits the Earth? Yes. It's absolutely possible that these things can happen. But what's the probability of it? And with Bitcoin, I've seen this to be true time and time again. The more you know, the more you buy. Where your mind goes, your money follows. And I see this all the time, right? People just they come across this thing, they get to know it a bit more, they experience a rally in purchasing power, and then they start digging under the hood. Now, well, hang on, what is Bitcoin? Well, Bitcoin's just money. Well, what is money? Credit to Gary. He's done an absolutely epic job of playing the cards he has at the time. But where I would challenge him in an open debate is to ask him, what is money? He's extremely good at making money. I think of myself quite like this in terms of going through university, taking business degrees, getting into a broking role. You're highly trained into how to make money, but never stop and go, well, hang on, what is money? You don't end up as a young bloke on a desk trading interest rate swaps if you're not fucking hungry, super smart, and survive for a number of years. On top of that, build a YouTube channel with content around economics. As soon as you start to look at Bitcoin through the lens of money, you realize there's a difference between investing and saving. And that's a really important difference to make. But the sound properties of money give it the ability, or its features, shall we say, store of value, unit of account, and medium of exchange. And what we've grown up with, at least for me in the UK, for example, with the pound, is a unit of account, a medium of exchange, but never a store of value. I just didn't even know that was a function that money could actually fulfill. Now, in that sense, I didn't really realize that gold was money, right? And then it's like, okay, well, what is money? Well, then you've got to go back through the history of money. You can see how many different things we've tried over time to use as money to solve this problem of the double coincidence of wants. How do we evolve from a purely barter economy to a more complex ecosystem and network of trade? Well, you need money. So money is a technology in that sense. And so Bitcoin is a technology, and Bitcoin is a savings technology. And Gary doesn't understand this, right? I wrote a comment to the YouTube video in which he states Bitcoin is going to zero. The probability of zero, in my opinion, the probability of Bitcoin going to zero is under 1%. And the probability that Gary hasn't spent 100 hours studying Bitcoin is at 99%. He hasn't spent the time doing it. And that means he hasn't understood what it is. And this brings up some interesting stuff. So for some reason, this is a guy that was motivated by money, ended up on the trading floor of a bank, has a YouTube channel about economics, but still hasn't touched together these different information points to realize that actually maybe Bitcoin isn't what he thinks it is. And that's a trade I'm willing to make all day long. Gary, you think what you want, mate. I don't care. What I'm very confident is this awesome first principles approach that the question, what is money, makes you ask. And then you start talking about the different characteristics of money. You can look at the Austrian School of Economics. You can look at the history of different types of money we've used. And it all starts to click into place. This makes more sense. And so, yeah, well done to the guy who hosted the podcast, because he's made a clickbaity as fuck title, Bitcoin's going to zero, Gary Stevenson. And then you've got a guy ranting about Bitcoin, and he just makes a number of comments that he hasn't yet spent enough time looking at what it actually is. And makes the typical mistake, for example, of lumping Bitcoin in with the rest of crypto. And, you can just print more of these things. Well, anyone that's looked at Bitcoin for more than a few hours knows that that's not true. It's a fixed cap, the supply of 21 million. And then it's this idea of, okay, well, let's pull apart what could make Bitcoin go to zero. Okay, well, obviously, maybe they can just switch the internet off. This is something I hear all the time. Okay, well, how do you actually do that? Well, the internet itself is actually quite decentralized. And you start to see that there's internet connectivity in different parts of the world, organized and maintained by different people. So you'd have to get every single one of those internet providers to switch off at the same time. Is that possible? Let's say that it is. Okay, what happens if you do it? Well, if someone somewhere with their Bitcoin node, the totally decentralized Bitcoin node network, which has every single transaction of Bitcoin ever done, you've got to take out every single one of those nodes. And if you take out all of the internet globally, you've got a hell of a bigger problem with the $900 trillion worth of wealth out there than the little 1 trillion or 2 trillion that Bitcoin is. So it's there's just lots of reasons why I think going to zero is completely impossible. Then you go and meet the community of Bitcoin. If Bitcoin today is trading at 90,000, 100,000 US dollars, if it drops to 9, what's going to happen? A shitload of people are going to buy as much of it as they can. Right? So what? It's going to go down to 900, down to $9, down to zero. And these people aren't just going to buy, keep accumulating. Forget it. These people they're betting their life, right? I die on this hill. The concept of sound money, the concept of a meritocracy. And actually, that's a good point to draw on. Gary, if for whatever reason you ever listen to this, you talk about inequality, and you're not wrong. There is some crazy shit going on in the world right now, with the rich are just getting richer. And is that a world I want to embrace and allow to happen? Or is that a world that I struggle with? And putting aside the answer to that question, one thing that Bitcoin does, which is very cool, is it's a system of rules, not rulers. And so even if someone amasses a big Bitcoin stack, they can't change the rules of the system. This is quite the opposite to the fiat world, in which the richer someone is, the more that they can bribe a judge, the easier it is for them to switch legislation in their favor. And before you know it, they've made themselves more money and made themselves even harder to catch or to bring to justice. And so what I invite you to do, Gary, is ask the question, what is money? And that, as an economist, is one of the most fascinating things you can ask, in my opinion. And I am just a guy who sits at home and studies economics on his own, right? I wouldn't call myself an economist, but if you're interested in business, if you're interested in investing, if you're interested in technology, if you're interested in spirituality, Bitcoin is a big deal, because it is shifting consciousness. It is raising people's ability up off the floor to own something for the first time. It is digital property rights. It's the best form of property rights ever existing. So it's a big deal, mate. So just write it off. That's fine. But what if you're looking at a map that is not the full territory? What if actually you haven't got all the pieces of the puzzle available to you in one place to actually make the right decision about this? So I encourage you to dig deeper and look at the history of money. Look at the way that Bitcoin is decentralized, with nodes all over the world, with a very, very small amount of computing power that's required to run those things, right? That is a stark difference to Ethereum, for example, that has a very small node network and a very small mining network that actually is all controlled by AWS and another couple of large cloud computing providers. That thing is not decentralized. The takeaway point is, I am lucky. I'm lucky because, and shout out to Andrew Bailey here, he's coming on the show tomorrow, who I met at the Bitcoin conference in Indonesia, for highlighting this to me as well. It's there is a number of things that happen in my life that meant that I started looking at Bitcoin more than just some kind of internet craze. And those things weren't all good. The death of my father as a young man, that's shit. But I was forced to figure out how to look after inheritance. And you want to do that job properly, right? Like, how do I do this properly? How do I make sure what was given to me is given to the next generation in years to come? And ultimately, that all takes me to Bitcoin. But another thing I was looking at was renewable energy and how to incorporate more renewable energy into a national grid, and the idea of demand side response, so selling a reduction in demand to the local electricity infrastructure, and how Bitcoin mining as movable load fits into that so brilliantly. It's like the amount of hash rate that the current Bitcoin network has at its disposal is insane. It's the largest computer network ever built. It's done it completely organically with no CEO and viral adoption from the bottom up. It's an extraordinary thing to witness. So when you hear people with a loud voice and a big platform going, Bitcoin's going to zero, ask yourself two questions. One, what is the chance that this person has asked the question, what is money? And then two, what is the chances that this person has done 1, 10, 100 hours of research on Bitcoin? And my guess is that every single time you will find that A, they've not studied it, and B, they're not thinking about what money actually is. So, look, Gary, I'll debate you any day, mate, and reach out if you ever see this.